is that kind of like the Bible. You've got this event, or these events that happened a long time ago, written down at the time, and then passed on throughout history. Is it the case that the message has kind of been lost in translation? You know, so it's a real legitimate question. And if we're going to be talking about looking into life with Jesus, and we saw last week so much of that is based on the Bible, then we need to figure out, is the Bible trustworthy? Is it reliable? And that's the topic for tonight. This is so foundational. Next week and the week after and the week after, we're going to get right into the nitty-gritty of what the Bible actually teaches, the big picture of the Bible. But first, we need to be confident that the Bible is actually trustworthy. So that's what we're going to explore together. I want to invite Conan up again. Give him a round of applause. Say hello. And just going to keep getting to know him. I know some of you know him quite well. Some of you, the first time you saw him was last week. So just a few more questions to get to know you, Conan. Give us a bit of insight into what a really, really good day off would be for you.
Maybe sleeping in. If I can actually sleep in, that's sometimes better, but otherwise the mind sometimes going too much. And then getting up. This is a problem though, because I like to go for a surf if the surf's good, but then getting up early is often beneficial before the wind gets up. So if I could somehow sleep in, then go for a surf and the surf's okay. Nor a head's often really good. And then perhaps having a coffee with Belinda up the top there, or going somewhere for coffee. That'd be good. And then, this doesn't always happen, but maybe watching Manly win. This doesn't happen at all at the moment. Yeah, in the evening, maybe Friday night footy or something like that. Yeah, having a really good win would be excellent.
Cool. Last week you shared a little bit about your journey in becoming a Christian. You yourself looked into life with Jesus, did a similar kind of thing to what we're doing here. Did you go straight from there into being a pastor?
Yeah, no.
Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Okay, sure. The first year of uni, I gave my life to Jesus, and I was studying then, and so I wanted to work out what it would be like being a vet and being a Christian. So I ended up finishing uni. I ended up being 6 years all up, and then went and worked around Liverpool way as a vet. And then I think people were encouraging me to think about doing Christian ministry, being a pastor. So I went and did kind of like an apprenticeship for pastors. They exist. So I went and worked at a church in Liverpool for a couple of years, and that was really helpful. I was in an area which was so multicultural, different people from so many different backgrounds. I met up and read the Bible with two people the first time. The first guy was a guy who worked at the stock exchange, he was a bit of a high flyer. The other guy was probably younger than me, and the other guy was a 50-year-old Fijian mechanic, and very, very different. And that was great. That was very helpful for me. I've been at uni, kind of a little closed bubble for a bit of time, so seeing how the Bible related to people from different avenues of life, and met up with people at Villawood Detention Centre, read the Bible with Muslims, helped give driving lessons to Muslims, which was hairy, developed some friendships in Liverpool, and then went to Bible college for 4 years in Newtown. So I did a theology degree, and then worked in Sydney for a bit of time at a university and a church at Western Sydney, and then did so then we started the church, Lighthouse Church, in 2006, and then have done a master's during that time as well. So that's kind of been the journey from then.
Cool. We're going to live with you and hear from you about how the Bible is reliable.
Well, I reckon some information you get with people or from people is information that, in the end, who cares? So I've told, please don't do this during the talk, maybe after, when you get some more supper. You can only fold a piece of paper 7 times. Apparently that's true. Someone can tell me if I'm wrong. Apparently all the unmarked swans in England belong to the Queen, and Canberra's the capital of Australia. And that's information like, yeah, who cares? It's not that sort of information that's really significant. But there is some information that affects your life quite significantly. Say, for example, we haven't done this, it's just an example, but say there was a bomb that was about to go off in this room in 45 seconds, and I told you that and it was really true, that is information that you can't just go, yeah, it's information that must affect your life. And the information that we saw last week is the information I think that's like a bomb that's about to go off. It's the information that, if true, must affect us. We saw last week that people want the good life. And we do all things to try and pursue the good life, to get a good life. And then it can feel like there's something missing, even when we're trying to pursue all these things. And we made the statement that we've been made to be worshippers of something, and we usually worship something to try and get the good life. And then Jesus comes along and makes this outrageous claim that he is the one who we should worship to give us the good life. And then even backed up and made an even more outrageous claim. The reason he's the one to worship, to give the good life, is because he claims to be God. And so that type of information where you go, well, what do you do with someone who makes that outrageous claim? And we saw the possibilities of what do you do with that. You could say, well, maybe he's a liar, or he's a lunatic, or he's actually Lord. And so if Jesus actually is God, then it makes sense to respond to him rightly. It's information you can't just go, yeah, I'll just put that to the side. It's news that no sensible person would really just leave alone. And since that information has such effect, such wide-reaching consequences, it's the type of information you want to make sure is true. Make sure it's not dodgy. It's the type of information you want to make sure that we know about Jesus is reliable because it has such an effect. And personally, for me, this was massive. This was something I wanted to make sure that was true in why I believed it. I'm not a Christian just because it works. I'm a Christian because I think it's true. And the thing is, it's even more significant for Christianity than some other world religions that the information is true. So if Buddhism is really a bunch of ideas that gives you a way of life, whereas Islam is a set of morals that you follow, that you need to do, and other religions have a set of rituals that you do, a set of traditions that you may follow. But Christianity is different to all of those, because Christianity is all about Jesus. It's about a real person in history who did real things. Christianity is not just a bunch of don't do this and do this. Christianity is not just a bunch of morals. It's not just a bunch of ideas. It's not just a set of traditions. It's actually about a person. Jesus Christ. That's why it's Christianity. And so that's why we've got to make sure that the information about Jesus is true and reliable, what we have about him. So what we're going to do tonight is kind of alluded to by Michael then. We're going to do two things. The first thing we're going to do is check out the information that was written down by people. Is it actually reliable? Was it written down reliably? Are those facts reliable as they've been written down? And so that's the first type of thing we're going to do, is looking at the information about Jesus. And then the second thing is, has the information that was written down then about Jesus got to us reliably? That's the second thing we're doing. So the first thing, did they record the facts about Jesus reliably? Now, you could think, well, the stuff we've got about Jesus is written by people who are biased. And we could think, well, maybe that's not great. People who wrote stuff about Jesus are writing it because they really wanted us to believe in Jesus. And so maybe they just wrote anything they wanted, just so that we'd believe. It could be like someone who loves a certain football team, like me with Manly. Maybe when I talk about Manly, I'm always presenting them in a positive light and putting a good spin on them. And maybe people think, well, maybe that's what the people who wrote the New Testament or the Bible did. So let's think about the Bible. And the Bible has two halves to it. The first half is called the Old Testament, and that's stuff before Jesus. The second half is called the New Testament, that's stuff about Jesus and onwards. What can you say, just picking up the New Testament, what we can say about the New Testament, was it so biased that therefore it's untrustworthy? Now, being interested in a topic, I reckon is actually a good thing. Yes, the Bible was written by those who are interested in him, but that doesn't mean you disregard it. Because usually it's good to go to someone who knows about the stuff to get information from them. Say, for example, as an example, you go to a new house, The garden's an absolute schmozzle. You've got not much idea about gardening. So who do you go and speak to? An accountant? Of course you don't. You go to a gardener because they're interested in the topic, and that makes sense to go and speak to someone like that. If you don't want to know stuff about Jesus, it's actually good to speak to people who met Jesus or knew Jesus. Also, the biased claim about the New Testament that is written by people who knew Jesus, it's not just done haphazard way. It was done in a way that was very, very measured and cautious and reliably looked after the information. So, doctors, the type of people, I don't know if we have doctors here, so I hope I won't offend anybody, but doctors are the type of people who usually are concerned about details and facts. For me, I'm always worried about the doctors who got 50% in their exams at uni. You think, you go to them and say, oh, doc, my stomach's really sore, and they go, oh, stomachs. Yeah, didn't look at them much, failed in that part. But I can tell you about your lungs. But generally, doctors are those type of people who are usually concerned about details and facts. One of the guys who wrote a biography of Jesus was a doctor, Dr. Luke. And he actually, at the beginning of what he wrote, it's called Luke's Gospel, he actually tells you why he's writing. And look at what he says that shows his particularity to details and facts. So here it is, a bit of the Bible on the screen. It says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. This is the very first part of Luke. Just as were handed down to us by those who, from the first, were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you've been taught. So look what he says. He says, I've written information from eyewitnesses. Many, many, many people saw Jesus. In fact, thousands. And Luke travelled with one of Jesus' key eyewitnesses, a guy called Paul. And notice it says there, I carefully investigated. So in the sentence 3 there, carefully investigated, as a doctor would. He says he writes an orderly account. It's not like he's in front of Netflix just kind of watching that and jot down a bit here. He didn't just kind of slap it down. Wrote an orderly account is like a scholar making sure their work is meticulous. And he says why he does it. In the last bit, in sentence 4, he says, so that you may know the certainty of this stuff about Jesus. When you read what Luke's doing, Dr. Luke's doing, he's doing it that reeks of reliability, that reeks of doing something carefully. Another thing when you think about the significant thing about how the Bible was recorded reliably is that it was written at a time and circulated at a time when people were still living who witnessed the events. So Luke writes down his gospel, gets copied and shared around the place. People were living at the time when that was shared who could have gone, what you're saying, Luke, is just wrong. I was there. It didn't happen like that. For example, Dr. Luke writes that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, and that was circulated. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, people could have read what Luke wrote and gone, Luke, what are you doing? What are you talking about? You're taking something, you're smoking something? No, we know Jesus didn't rise from the dead. There's his tomb. There's his body. But there is enough people who didn't like Jesus who actually wrote about Jesus and backed up the things in the Bible. The best way to stop Christianity and Jesus, the message about Jesus, would just be to produce Jesus' body and say, look, he didn't rise from the dead. But there isn't anybody saying that type of thing in the historical records. There aren't reports of people saying that Luke's theology or Luke's teaching is dodgy. There aren't people saying that type of thing. There aren't people disagreeing with the Bible and what happened there. In fact, people who didn't even like Jesus wrote lots of things that agree with the Bible, as we'll see in a second. And when some people don't believe what the Bible says is true because maybe the disciples were biased. With being biased, you can be biased with some things but not other things. So I'll come back to that Manly example. Say I would say Manly's the best team, or Manly's backline is the best, or Manly's team played really well last weekend. I could say that. They didn't actually. But I could say that, but that's just my opinion. I could be biased at that point, can't I? I could just put a spin on it. But if I say Manly won the game last week, I can't be biased on that. It's either right or wrong. They lost, just for your information. People can't be biased with a black or white decision at that point. Now you can't make up how many players were on the field. You can't be biased with that bit of information. Some things you can be biased at, but other things you can't. Likewise with the Bible and Jesus. So you can't make up that Jesus' hometown was Nazareth, or that his mother was Mary, or that he had 12 disciples, or he died on a cross, or he rose from the dead. It's not something you can be biased with. It's either true or not true according to the facts you can look up. The other thing about this is how seriously you're taking the information that you're recording. So the people who wrote the Bible, Jesus' 12 disciples, 11 of them died for putting their trust in Jesus. Now, I like Manly, I support Manly, but there's no way I'm going to give my life for Manly. But these guys did. Now, they could have been totally mistaken, that's a possibility, but they really believed what they wrote down. So much so that they were willing to die for that Jesus died on the cross and he actually rose from the dead. It would be totally stupid to make stuff up and then die for stuff you've made up. That's just dumb. The sixth thing is, we're thinking about this bias stuff. If the disciples were so biased and just making this stuff up, they write down stuff that you think you want to cover up. So they, for example, Peter, who's one of the leaders of the church, when you read the historical documents, Peter, at a significant point, ends up disowning Jesus. Thomas, the phrase doubting Thomas that we have, he doubted that Jesus really rose from the dead. Now, if you were making up the religion, you'd probably want to, and these guys are the leaders of the church, you'd probably want to cover that up. Why is it written down? Because that's just what happened. So there's strong weight to seeing that the Bible, the New Testament, is accurate, it's truthful in what the authors of the New Testament wrote. They wrote down and recorded what was there reliably. Well, maybe that was reliable, what they wrote down. But the other significant thing with showing that it's not just bias is that people who didn't like Jesus, people who were not Christians, wrote about Jesus, which is significant in and of itself. Wow, this is a guy worth taking note of. And secondly, they actually wrote things that were the same as what's in the Bible. So non-believers wrote stuff. There were many reliable historians who just were writing history and recorded information about Jesus. So a guy called Flavius Josephus, he's a Jewish historian around 80 AD, and he wrote the Antiquities of the Jews. And this is a famous work. You go to a university, got nothing to do with Christianity or whatever, this is just a massive, significant historical piece written by Flavius. And he wrote this stuff. So this is what he wrote. About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man. It's interesting how he writes that, isn't it? Because if Jesus was claimed to be a supernatural being, so this guy even recognises that's floating around. For he was one who performed surprising deeds, miracles, and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Messiah, and when upon the accusation of the principal men among us, Pilate had condemned him to a cross, those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them spending a third day restored to life, for the prophets of God had foretold these things, and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of the Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared. All the highlighted bits that I've got there, I've bolded, agree with the Bible. And this is written by someone who doesn't like Jesus and doesn't follow Jesus. And that kind of shows you, again, the historical reliability of the Bible. Now, there's another guy called, a completely different type of person, Cornelius Tacitus. He was the greatest Roman historian. So if you want to look at Roman history around this time, forget religion, just think about history, this is the guy you will go and read at university regarding this. And he wrote in 115 AD the Annals of the Imperial Rome. And you can Google this stuff. So he wrote, Christians derive their name from a man called Christ, who, during the reign of Emperor Tiberius, Dr. Luke mentions Emperor Tiberius, and had been executed by sentence of Procurator Pontius Pilate. Notice what he calls Christianity? The deadly superstition. So he doesn't like Christians. Thus checked for a moment, broke out afresh not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but also in the city of Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world meet and become popular. A bit cynical towards Rome as well. And there's other ones, I was going to skip over a couple of other ones as well, but you look at non-believers and what they write about Jesus, and they say about Jesus, people who didn't like Jesus, that where Jesus lived, when he lived, that he was an influential teacher, that he did things that were supernatural, that he was executed, when, by who, and how. The people who claimed that he actually rose from the dead, and he was now called the title Christ, and the people who followed him were Christians. And that stuff just equates and equals what's in the Bible. So those who did the New Testament, who wrote the New Testament, did it accurately, reliably, and truthfully. So that's the first big thing. Was it actually written down accurately? And I'll say yes. What about the whole Chinese whispers type of thing? Has it got to us unchanged? Is it like the Chinese whispering type of thing? And that's a particularly good question. Has it got to us unchanged? I mean, New Testament was written around 2,000 years ago. Maybe it's changed along the way. Don't all the new translations show that type of thing? So the first thing you want to show is the closeness of the manuscripts, the actual documents, the documents that we've got, to the actual time of the event in the New Testament. The first thing to look at. The documents that we have, you go to universities or museums, and how close they were to when the events happened. They are ridiculously close. Let me show you some diagrams to make the point. So a guy called Homer, that's not Simpson, but this Homer is a Greek poet, and he lived, you can see, around 900 BC. And so he lived there. The most recent manuscript closest to us is around 400 BC. And so it's about 500 years difference between when Homer existed and lived and what he did and the manuscript that we've got today. Take Plato. So he is a kind of a reasonably well-known philosopher and mathematician, a kind of Greek guy, and he lived around 400 BC, but the closest document anybody has is 900 AD, so that's a massive amount of time, around 1,200 years. And then you've got Caesar, so you may have, school's maybe a long time for some of us, but some of us in school, Julius Caesar, so he lived around 100 BC to 44 BC, and the most recent document that actually talks about Caesar is close to 1,000 years later. Okay, and nobody doubts Julius Caesar. So you go to school, you learn about Julius Caesar and the Gallic Wars, and that's just history. But look at how far the documents we have from actually when the events occurred. Now about Jesus in the New Testament, about 40 to 90 years. So Jesus, they said, around 33 AD died, and the New Testament was written very, very close. And we have documents very, very close to that time. Massively close. And so if someone doesn't doubt Caesar at all, why would you all doubt Jesus and the reliability of the documents? So the closeness, that's the first thing, the closeness of the documents we have. So you can go to museums and you can look at bits of the Bible and how close they're actually written to the time of Jesus. The second thing, that's the first thing, written very close. The second thing is the sheer number of documents. So let's do the same type of comparison. You've got Homer. There's 643 documents in total across the world about him. Okay, remember they were written a long time from when it happened to the earliest documents. Plato, there's 7, and Julius Caesar is 10. And again, nobody, I mean, Plato and Caesar are particularly well-known people that everybody studies. Now, Jesus, you actually have to change the scale of how this is because of the ridiculous number of documents. 24,000 documents regarding the New Testament are in existence today, scattered across the world. There are so many documents. And if people are not disbelieving these guys, there's even less to disbelieve the reliability of the New Testament. That's the second thing. So it's copies close to the original events. Second thing, so many copies. The third thing is, have they changed over time? And what you can do with this is, say you've got Luke's Gospel. It was written in Greek, and that gets copied. So people want to read Luke's Gospel. How do you do that? You get a scribe who spends meticulous time writing it out and sends one to Egypt, and someone then sends one to Jerusalem and sends one to Rome. And so you can compare them. Then what happens is they get copied and copied and copied and copied. You know, eventually that's why in the end there's 24,000 different types of manuscripts. What you can do to see if it's changed, and this is just an academic exercise that happens, you can check this copy here, with this copy here, with this copy here, and say that, I don't know, 150 AD, and check across. Have they at the same time, have they changed in different geographical places? And no, they haven't. Or you can check, say this is time going on. So this is 150 AD and that's 300 AD. You can check the time going downwards. Have they changed? The answer is no, they haven't. And then what you can do is you can do cross-fertilisation. You can check this copy at a certain time in a certain place with, say, this copy at a different time in a different place. Have they changed? No, they haven't. And so technically it's called textual criticism, and you can have a look at that. So they were very close to the original. They were copied, sent to different places, and you can check them. So you've got very early copies, you've got so many copies, and you can check the copies over a different time, and the conclusion is the Bible hasn't changed, and it was recorded reliably. And so if it's accurate, if it was recorded accurately by people who were biased and people who were not biased, if we're reading what was actually written, it hasn't changed. The big question is, what do you do with that information? What do you do? If Jesus, in this information that's accurate and reliable, claims to be God that we should worship to get the good life, is he a lunatic? Is he a liar? Or is he Lord?